Welcome to the High School Preview Show presented by Gold Athletics. I'm your host, John Sarianides. And as always, I'm joined by my partner, Tyler Amaral. Tyler, how are you this evening?
I'm good, John. I can't believe we're already in week 6. We're kind of heading into this home stretch here. I think this is really where we start to see the contenders maybe separate themselves from the teams that just had a hot few weeks. So it's definitely a kind of a fascinating point in the season.
It is. And this is where you're going to also start getting some of the big matchups. And there's some great matchups on the docket for this weekend. Of course, it is Columbus Day weekend. So a lot of schools are playing tomorrow night. I believe there's over 40 games in Massachusetts tomorrow night. A lot of games also in the region as well. You've got a bunch of games in Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine as well. So it'll be a busy Thursday night. You also still have some games on Friday night. And there'll be some this weekend as well, but the bulk of the games will be played tomorrow night. Now, before we do get started, I do want to remind you that if you are a coach who's looking for a fundraiser that works for your program and can help you generate some revenue, visit goldathletics.com today. Matt Ross and his team have the experience and the know-how to get you into a fundraiser that works for your program, your community, and your student athletes. If you want to make money fast, then you need to visit goldathletics.com today. All right, so there's some big games on the docket here in Massachusetts. As usual, we'll start with the MIA games and make our way around from there. Before we do that, we have a comment here from Jim Cunningham. Hello there. Have a great show. Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it, my friend. Thank you for checking in. But as I was saying, Tyler, there's a lot of big games on the schedule for this weekend. And, of course, probably the biggest one in Massachusetts this weekend is Xaverian at Catholic Memorial. Of course, this is a rivalry that goes beyond Xaverian and CM. Al Fornaro, John DiBiase, these guys have matched wits for years when DiBiase was at Everett. Now they are he is now at Catholic Memorial, I should say. This is always a big game on the schedule, always a big game in the Catholic Conference. And look, I think for me, when I look at this matchup, Tyler, I think it's an opportunity for Catholic Memorial to really show us who they are. It's hard to tell who they are. They lost to Cardinal Hayes, didn't end up playing St. Francis. They've blown out Leominster, blown out New Bedford. Now I think we're going to get a pretty good idea of just how good this team could be potentially.
Yeah, I agree. And I think naturally, most people in Massachusetts don't really have a good sense of how good Cardinal Hayes is. We know they're good, but how do they compare to other top teams in Massachusetts? I think is a big question people would have. And then, of course, the St. Francis game that was postponed. They won by forfeit. I saw them last week against New Bedford. Make no mistake about it, they were clearly the better team. And I think I was impressed though. Still, they have a lot of skill. That they have a very good secondary. You just saw Jackson Tucker commit to BC, so he's the latest in that CM to BC pipeline. Kais Flannery, he impressed me. He threw for nearly 200 yards and 4 touchdowns in that first half against New Bedford. Didn't even play the entire first half. So he's a good player. Makai Dodd, he got banged up in that game against New Bedford, so I hope he's going to be out there. But they do have some other backs as well. LaShawn Sharp scored in the game. Isaiah Simmons scored in the game. So they've got a deep stable of backs as well. I haven't seen Xaverian play in person this year, but we know what to expect with X. They're the defending Division I state champions. This, again, like we said it 2 weeks ago, Central Xaverian, arguably the game of the year on paper. You can make an argument for this one as well. I think this is going to be a great battle. It's been a while since Xaverian's knocked off CM. I think that streak continues this year. It's going to be a back and forth affair, but I like CM 28-21.
Yeah, it's going to be a great game. I think where Xaverian can win this game is up front. Their defensive line is among the best in the state. They give people problems. They do have that running game now with Vincent Busa. They can run the football. Will Wood, they can throw the football. They're more balanced than we've seen in years past. They were pretty balanced last year, although a lot of their offense ran through Henry Hasselback. I think it's going to be a really good game. I think it could go either way. But like I said, I'm curious to see just how good this CM team is. We know a lot of the names, but there's also a lot of new faces there, especially up front. We'll see how those guys do. Next up, we have Boston College High School visiting Malden Catholic. 2 surprise teams in the Catholic Conference. Paul Zakauskas back at his alma mater in his first year. And, of course, you've got Coach Gaff over at Malden Catholic. This should be a pretty good game. BC High is starting to to get it going offensively now. But both of these teams have some pretty good skill. This is an intriguing matchup. This is not your father's Malden Catholic here. This program is more competitive now.
Yeah, looks like Malden Catholic's kind of turned a corner here. They're going to be one of the better teams in Division IV. One of the more surprising teams in the state to this point. They haven't lost yet. They haven't played a team nearly as good as BC High, though. They've went out of state. They beat Concord Carlisle. They played Concord and Windham, New Hampshire. Kind of took care of business there as well. So they've started off hot, but this Catholic Conference slate, that's going to be something that they just haven't seen, frankly, to this point. So they played St. John's Prep, I think St. John's Shrewsbury the night before Thanksgiving. So these next 4 games, BC High, Xaverian, CM, St. John's Prep, no team in Division IV is going to face a stretch like that. So they're going to be battle tested when they get there. I just think BC High at this point is too good. For MC. It's a great story, one of the better stories of the year, MC, and how they've kind of got this program headed in the right direction. I just don't think they're quite at BC High's level yet.
Yeah, I agree. And BC High has been pretty consistent. They've been in some battles, but they've been pretty consistent. And we know what that offense can do. All right, next up we have Reading at Arlington. Reading comes into this one undefeated. Congratulations to Coach John Fiore, who was named the Patriots Coach of the Week this week. They take on an Arlington team that's pretty good up front, physical. They got BC commit Brady Beckenhouse along their offensive and defensive line. Should be a pretty good test for a Reading team. That is kind of a surprise. I mean, that they struggled last year. Much of the roster this year played last year. A lot of them got experience. They're back now, and that experience looks like it's paying dividends. This is the type of Reading team that we're used to seeing.
It is the type of Reading team we're used to seeing, and I honestly didn't expect this year. They really did struggle last year. I think they went 3-8, but last week I thought was a big test, right? Like Saturday afternoon game, going to Woburn. Woburn's a good program, a solid program. And they went down early, I think it was 6-0, and then they scored 28 unanswered or something like that. So that was a super impressive win. I think the Rockets are sort of back here. They're going to be a contender in D3. I didn't see that coming. I thought, teams like Milton, Billerica, some teams like that would be the favorites. But I think Reading's kind of emerged here as one of those favorites, along with teams like North Attleboro in Division III. The Rockets are really taking care of business. I don't think that changes here. Arlington, so Reading can run the ball. We know with Bursey and quarterback Jack Murphy, they can run the ball. Stoneham ran for over 400 yards against Arlington earlier in the year. I think Reading, though they use a different formation, a different scheme, I think they're going to follow a similar game plan, and they're going to rack up some running yards in this game and knock off Arlington.
All right, next up, we're going to take a look at Wayland at Lincoln Sudbury. Of course, Wayland coming off a tough loss to Shawsheen last week. Lincoln Sudbury similarly lost to Foxborough. Pretty good rivalry game here. These schools have played for a while in the dual county. It should be a pretty good matchup between two programs that, while they're not off to the same start, Wayland was off to a pretty good start until last week. Lincoln Sudbury's played a pretty tough schedule, though, and they're young, under a first-year coach, Coach McKay. I think this is a program that is going to get better as the year goes on. This will be a good test for Wayland, though. One thing we know about LS, Tyler, is they always have skill. They always have athletes.
They do. They always have skill. They always have athletes. But I think at this point in time, I think Wayland's probably the better team. Wayland got beat up last week, but that Shawsheen team is very good. I think Wayland bounces back this week. Max Dreesen's a Bucknell commit, one of the best backs in the state. I've got Wayland in this one.
Yeah, it should be a pretty good game. And I agree that Wayland will bounce back. They ran into a buzzsaw last week. That Shawsheen team is now emerging as the favorite in Division 5. All right, next up, we have a Western Mass, Central Mass matchup. We have Springfield Central traveling to take on Westfield. Kind of a tough start for Westfield. I think the expectations were a little higher there. They haven't exactly met them. It's been a little bit of a slow start. They take on a Springfield Central team that we know how good they are. They're a wagon. You got Stain, you got Rogers, among others. It's a really good team. It's going to be a really good test for Westfield, and one that they would have to play well above their heads to pass.
Yeah, I think like when you look at the Western Mass portion of Springfield Central's schedule, it's like who is going to be competitive, who's going to be able to compete with them and give them some sort of test. In the past, we've seen Westfield, but even in those instances, they've still lost by 2 or 3 scores. So I think this Westfield team's good. They're coming off a D3 semifinal appearance. And I think they have the ability to kind of hang with Central for maybe a half, but ultimately that Central team's just got too many horses, too much top-end talent. I think they pull away and win by multiple scores in that one.
Yeah, Springfield Central, I just think is too good. And while the Bombers, Coach Parent's done a great job there. That's been one of the better programs out in that part of the state the last 3 years. I think that they're outmatched here, and I think ultimately that proves to be the difference. All right, we got one from tomorrow night, Canton at North Attleboro. Our Jared Keene is going to be there for that one. Pretty good Hockomock League Davenport matchup between the 3-1 Bulldogs and the 4-0 Red Rocketeers. North Attleboro has been rolling along. They're coming off a bye. The week before that, they beat OA 51-0. Canton lost for the first time to Bedford a couple weeks ago, but this Canton team's off to a pretty decent start. They're well coached. Anthony Fallon's done a nice job there. But anytime you have to go to North to take on that program with that tradition, and when they're rolling like they have been so far this season, they're a tough matchup.
They are a tough matchup, and I saw them beat Taunton a few weeks back. The game was not competitive at all. And in my eyes, I think that made North the D3 favorite. Ryan Bannon, one of the better players in the state. He could run for 150 on offense and make 15 tackles on defense. The kid's a two-way star, one of the better players in the state.
Recently committed to Georgetown.
Right, recently committed to Georgetown. Frankie Strachan, another key player for this team at linebacker and fullback. And then Chase Forsoli. They've been like a lot really run heavy. And then against Oliver Ames, they open it up and Chase Forsoli throws for like 5 touchdowns in the first half. So they have that ability too. Chase Forsoli is a 4-year starter at quarterback. I think the pieces are fitting together nicely. I'm a believer in Mike Strachan in that program. I think they're the favorite in Division III. Canton is a good team. They're going to be a playoff team. I can't see them beating North, especially on the road.
Yeah, it's a tall order. And like I said, I think Coach Fallon's done a great job there. But winning at North is always tough, especially when they're good. All right. Next up, we're going to go up to the MVC, and we got North Andover at Methuen. North Andover got off to a good start. They've scuffled here the last couple of weeks. Methuen, of course, is Methuen. You got Shane Eason, one of the best all-around players in the state, certainly one of the best offensive skill players in the state. Methuen's offense can put up points. This is going to be a tough matchup for North Andover. They can run the football and slow things down, and they're going to need to do that in this game, Tyler. But that Methuen team, with their ability to score as quick as they do and their ability to overwhelm you offensively, I think even if you ball control them, I still think that this could be too much to ask for North Andover.
Yeah, I think it was sort of an eye-opening win for me last week. Like I picked Andover to beat Methuen last week, and I just expected it to be a shootout. But Methuen was the only team that put up points in that game. It was 37-10, I believe was the final.
Yeah.
So Methuen has one of the better offenses in the state. I saw them play against Marshfield. They got off to a hot start and then kind of sputtered, and Marshfield won that game. But in my opinion, I think Easton's the most talented skill player in the state. He's just a dynamic weapon. Like, he could score from anywhere on the field at any point in time, out of the backfield, in the slot, split out. Like, it literally doesn't matter. Just get the ball into his hands. He's going to make things happen. Josh,
he'll make people happy.
He'll make plenty of people happy. He'll make Jim Cunningham happy. I know Jim's a Methuen and Tewksbury guy, so he'll make Jim happy when he scores touchdowns. And then Josh Quackey, he's a very electric player as well. So I think Methuen's just too much, especially on the offensive side, for North Andover to hang with.
You are watching the high school preview show presented by Gold Athletics. I'm your host, John Sirenitas. As always, I'm joined by my partner, Tyler Emerald. Just a reminder, coaches, if you are in the market for a fundraiser and need a quick way to make money and an effective way to make money that works for your program, your student athletes, and your community, then you need to get in touch with Matt Ross and his team at Gold Athletics. Visit goldathletics.com today for more information. All right, we're going to stay in the MVC. Next up, we have Tewksbury, who's undefeated at 4-0, taking on Billerica, who is coming off an 83, no, I'm not making this up, 83-point performance last week in a shootout win over Haverhill. 83 points. I mean, that's insane. I mean, at what point do you stop scoring? I've never heard of an 83-point game in all my years coaching or covering Massachusetts high school football. But an impressive performance by the Indians nonetheless. They have a stiff test, though, with Coach Aylward's Redmond coming to town.
Yeah, last Friday I was kind of scrolling through and looking at the scores, and I was like 83 to 56 or whatever. I was like, is this a misprint? And then I clicked on the box score, and I see all these touchdowns, and like Steven Gentile, he's the quarterback, and he ran for 307 touchdowns or whatever. It's just insane.
307 yards and 307 touchdowns.
307 yards and 7 touchdowns.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they
scored 307 touchdowns in one game. Holy crap,
I mean,
that's impressive.
Yeah, close enough, right? I think they must have scored 12 touchdowns if they scored 83. So that's just insane. But I think this is honestly probably the hardest game for me to pick this week. I don't really know what to make of this Bill Rickett team quite yet. Like, think
they're hard to figure out.
They are. I think they're a good team, and they're my preseason favorite to win D3, them and Milford. But I think Bill Rickett will still be in the mix. This is like a true toss up here. These MVC games are tough. These are two really well coached teams. I think I'm leaning Tewksbury here, like 26-20. I think the Redmen are one of the 2 or 3 best teams in Division 4. So I lean Redmond here, but I think this is going to be a great battle.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a great game. And I think if you're Tewksbury, you want – and the one thing about Tewksbury is they'll run the football and they'll do it out of a lot of different formations and they'll move their personnel around. They're going to need to do what they've done for years, ball control this Bill Rickett team, because you mentioned, Steven Gentile. He's one of the best quarterbacks in the state. You know what I mean? And he is an electric athlete who can make plays as a runner and as a passer. That offense has big play capability. You've got to keep them off the field. All right, next up, we are going to go down to the Patriot League and take a look at Scituate and Hanover. Scituate has been dominant thus far, 4-0. Hanover is 3-1. A lot of people, I think, Tyler, thought that Hanover is a program that's going to take a step back because they graduated such a talented senior class last year. But this is a good football program that's got a good foundation with their youth program and their younger programs, and they have been consistently good through the years. You're going to be there for one of those rare Friday night games. They're playing this week on a Friday night. Thoughts on this one? I think on paper it's a pretty good matchup, but man, it's tough to pick against Herb Devine, and I'm not saying that because of our mortgage right affiliation. It's reality. This is a damn good football team. It's really tough to pick against the Sailors.
It is really tough to pick against them. And like I thought Hanover would be in the mix. Like I thought they would be, like a quarterfinal or semifinal team in Division 5 again. It's a very good program. But the eye-opening game to me was that Duxbury game. They lost, but they were like super competitive with that Duxbury team. And I kind of viewed Duxbury and Scituate similarly. Like I think they're both, top tier teams in Division 4, probably the 2 best teams in Division 4. So I think Hanover is going to be able to contain the Scituate offense a little bit better than most teams can. I think this is going to be pretty similar to that Week 1 game between Scituate and Foxborough, where Scituate wasn't, scoring seemingly every time they touched the ball. They had to work for it. The drives were more methodical. That game was like 21-18 or something was the final for that one. So I could see something similar playing out in this one. Ultimately, though, I think Scituate's a better team, and I like them to win it 21-14.
Yeah, I mean, again, I just think with the way they play, and I think a lot of people, when they look at Scituate, Scituate is tough to defend because of their multiplicity. I mean, they could spread you out, throw the ball, get the ball to Lawson Foley, make big plays in the passing game, but they can also be physical. They get in short yardage situations in the red zone. They can pack things in, go big, and pound the ball. They can do some different things, and I think that they're tough to defend. I'm with you. I think Hanover gives them a game, but I think ultimately Scituate is a little better, and that proves to be the difference. Okay, we're going to go back out to Western Mass now for West Springfield at East Longmeadow. West Springfield has been the second best team in Western Mass, you can argue, so far, behind Springfield Central. They're 4-0, and they've been pretty convincing in their wins. When you look at East Longmeadow, their only loss is to Tantascwa. Should be a pretty good matchup between a 4-0 and 3-1 team here out in Western Mass.
It should be a good one. And West Springfield, they're just kind of rolling through the competition right now. So I think this is going to be easily their stiffest test to this point. I think West Side, though, they're a good team. Like, we've seen them at Gillette somewhat recently. I believe that was 2017 that they made a run to the D5 state championship game. They played North tough last year in the first round of the D3 playoffs. So this is a good program, and I think they're kind of overlooked, because they're out there in Western Mass. But they're a good team. East Longmeadow is a very good program as well. So I think East Longmeadow is going to challenge them, and I think West Side needs that as they kind of gear up toward for this playoff run here. Johnny Gingerua, he's one of the better receivers in the state. I don't think many people know that name. It is a great name, and I think people need to start to learn that name. He's a potential breakout performer in the Division III playoffs. I think the Terriers are just a little too talented for East Longmeadow, but with that said, I think this is the first time that West Side is truly tested this year.
Yeah, no, I think it'll be a pretty good test for them. And as you mentioned with East Longmeadow, they've been kind of a surprise team in Western Mass, but we've known going into the season that West Springfield's going to be a player. Should be a fun matchup, but I do think from a skill standpoint, they've got the edge, and I think that proves to be the difference. We're going to come back to Central Mass for another big matchup here. West Boylston at Clinton. Clinton kind of off to a disappointing start. I think people had higher expectations for them in Central Mass. They're 2-2. They're taking on 3-1 West Boylston. Of course, they're back-to-back state champions, West Boylston. They won it in D7 in 2022 and D8 last year. West Boylston's West Boylston. They're going to run their offense. They're going to be physical. They're going to be tough. They're a Mike Ross coach football team. They take on a Clinton team that's talented but hasn't necessarily lived up to expectations. That being said, going on the road, playing this team in Clinton, this is going to be a tough game for West Boylston.
Yeah, this is going to be an awesome, small school matchup here. And a lot of these small school matchups in Central Mass are like the marquee small school matchups across the state. Clinton's good. I still think they're going to be in the mix when all is said and done in Division 7. But West Boylston, leading up to the season, right? We're talking about Division 7 and Division 8. Like, West Boylston and Uxbridge dominated last year. Who's going to emerge this year? And now we're sitting here on October 9th, and it looks like West Boylston and Uxbridge are the teams that are emerging in Divisions, 8 and 7 again. So just kind of a testament to the programs that those schools have built. Coach Ross is going to run that double wing. It's tough to stop, tough to prepare against. You don't see it too often. In a big game, I'm not picking against Mike Ross right now. So I've got the Lions pulling this one out.
Yeah, it's hard because of the success of the program in recent years. It's been so good. All right, we're going to go down the Cape here in a game you're going to be at. Bishop Hendricken comes up from Rhode Island. Of course, they have been the consensus best program in the state for a long time. They're going to take on Barnstable. Hendricken coming off a big 24-7 win over rival LaSalle. Barnstable coming off a big win over rival Dennis Yarmouth last week, 14-12. This Barnstable team has surprised people. I think they're young. I think a lot of people felt they might be a year away, but Ross Jadkola has done a pretty good job with this program. They've got some good skill. They're going to have their hands full with Hendricken. These two teams do know each other. They used to scrimmage. They decided to play. Hendricken has played a bunch of out-of-state games so far. They've played Greenwich out in Connecticut. They've played a couple of New York teams. They're going to be playing Fairfield Prep in a couple of weeks. So a strong out-of-state slate for Keith Croft's team. But this should be a pretty good game. But something tells me, Tyler, that Barnstable's going to have their hands full with this talented Hendricken team.
Yeah, I think Barnstable has done a nice job scheduling this year. Like the last couple of years, I thought it was like a little too difficult a couple of years ago, a little too easy last year, and it's sort of just right this year. And they went out to Amherst and they got a nice win. They beat Dennis Yarmouth in a rivalry game. They beat BR. They beat Brockton. And one thing that's been kind of consistent throughout all of these games so far is their defense. Their defense has been very good, and I think people just kind of naturally, when they hear Barnstable, they think offense. They think this team's going to score a lot of points and win shootouts. But they're getting it done on the defensive side more this year, and they run the ball really well with Jason Dyer and Karan Ford. So I think that's going to continue again. I think they're going to be able to run the ball. against Hendricken. I think they're going to play tough defense, but ultimately Hendricken's the best team in Rhode Island for a reason. If we were ranking like the top teams here across the 6 states in just like the state's athletic associations, I would say they're probably a top 10 or 15 team. It's a great program. I'm happy that Barnstable's doing this. So they have Hendricken this week, and then on the 25th they host LaSalle. And I think those 2 games are going to be pretty important as Barnstable gears up for this Division II playoff race with teams like CM and KP, Marshfield, Bishop Feehan. This is going to really prepare them for teams like that. I think Hendricken wins this one, though. I think Barnstable's going to struggle to score 17-7, 20-7, something like that, but I've got Hendricken.
Yeah, Hendricken's tough. The Lynch to Laura connection is tough in the passing game. They can make big plays. But one thing about Hendricken is their willingness to run the football. They will line up, they will run the football, and then you fall asleep at the wheel. You start playing those 8-man fronts, and they can take those shots over the top, and that's when they become tough to beat. I'm with you. I think that ultimately they're too much to handle for Barnstable. But kudos to Barnstable. You bring up a great point. They're playing a great schedule, and they're playing arguably the 2 best teams in Rhode Island, or at least 2 of the best teams in Rhode Island. All right, next up we have Andover at Brockton. Brockton, under a first-year coach in Joseph Silva, it's been up and down for them. Andover has also been up and down for them. EJ Perry is back there. This has been an interesting matchup the last few years, and this should be the same this year. It's a good Division I matchup. Andover does present some problems for defenses. Brockton has been up and down so far this year in terms of their defense, so this could be a tough test for them. But Brockton is talented, and you got to play them there. This game could go either way.
Yeah, so I think Brockton has been up and down, right? And I think that if they were able to hold on and secure that win against Barnstable early in the season, I think that would have been nice for that program.
It changes the trajectory of their season.
It does, and especially because Barnstable's kind of beaten up on them recently, and so if they were kind of able to, get that monkey off their back and say, okay, we got Barnstable out of the way, we beat them, we can kind of use this as a springboard for the rest of the season. But that was a tough loss. They're a young team, young coaching staff. I think they're going to get it right within like the next couple of years. I just don't think it's this year, and I think Andover still has too much skill. So I've got Andover here by a couple touchdowns.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Brockton will get it going again. I also agree with you. It's not going to be this year. I think this is a tough matchup. Don Papa, that offense, they can score points. Andover does give up points, so Brockton's offense certainly could get theirs this week. But I don't know if they could keep up, and I think ultimately that proves to be the difference. All right, next up we have Old Rochester at Somerset Berkeley.
This should be a good game. I call it the SEC. I call it the large and the small. They have it like color coded. One's the blue and one's the gold. Like whatever. It's the large and the small. So I think Old Rochester. Like honestly, I didn't expect them to beat Dartmouth, but they did. They played Fairhaven really close. Fairhaven beat them by 3 or 4 touchdowns last year. That was a close game this year. And Somerset Berkeley, we talked about Hanover. Like that's their only loss. They lost by a touchdown to Hanover. They beat a very good Dennis Yarmouth team. So both of these teams are going to be playoff teams. They're both going to be contenders. But I really like the way Old Rochester's playing right now. They've really beat up on Medfield last week, coming off that high a couple weeks ago of beating Dartmouth. So I think Gavin Martin and company, they're really going to be able to run the football in this one. I like the Bulldogs. I think it's going to be a tough competitive game, 21-14, something like that. But I've got Old Rochester.
Yeah, Somerset Berkeley's had a nice year. I mean, when you look at it, they beat DY, only lost to a pretty good Hanover team. So, like to your point, I think this is going to be a really competitive, low-scoring type of game. It's not going to be a 14-10 type of game, but I could see it being a 21-14 kind of game. I think both of these teams run the football, chew clock, and they play pretty good defense. So I think it'll be a tight game, but I'm with you. I think Old Rochester is a little bit better, and that proves to be the difference. All right, next up, we've got some Boston City League action. Boston Latin Academy at Tech Boston. These 2 City League teams have been off to a good start so far this season. Latin Academy has wins over Boston Latin and East Boston. Tech Boston is 3-1 with their only loss to Boston English.
Yeah, I think this is going to be one of the better games in the city this season. I think I lean Dragons in this one, though. I think BLA just kind of consistently, they've been one of the better teams in the city year in and year out. So I'm leaning Latin Academy here, but I expect a close game. It feels like these Boston City games, like always like something like 22-16, something like that.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's what I'll go with here.
yeah. No, I agree. I think it'll be a pretty good matchup, but I agree with you. I'm going to go with Boston Latin as well. All right, we're going to talk some ISL here. Next up, we're going to talk some NEPSAC. We're going to start with a big evergreen matchup. We've got Dexter at St. Paul's. Of course, St. Paul's came to Brookline last year and beat Dexter. Dexter was one of the best offensive lines in New England, is going to look to return the favor tomorrow when they visit St. Paul's. Both teams are undefeated. That Dexter offense has been flying behind that offensive line, and Tyson Thomas. They are tough to play against. They present a lot of problems because of the way they can lean on people and run the football, but they can also make big plays in the passing game. This is going to be a terrific NEPSAC matchup between two teams that coming into the season were among the favorites in the Evergreen. Both of these teams are in our top 10 NEPSAC poll this week, so it should be a pretty good game.
It will be a good game. I think I'm leaning Dexter here. I think they get it done. Tyson Thomas, he's kind of been on the radar for a few years now. He was making plays as a sophomore at Grafton, so he's just a really dynamic playmaker. You mentioned that offensive line as well. I give the slight edge to Dexter, 28-21, something like that.
Yeah, St. Paul's is good. I mean, they have 3 big wins, but I think this Dexter team is at another level, especially because, like I said, that offensive line, it's a wagon, and they can lean on you. They can wear you down, but then they have enough skill where they can also make big plays in the passing game. I think that proves to be the difference. Going on the road and going up to St. Paul's is going to be a challenge, but I think Dexter is a little bit better here. We got another big ISL large matchup on Friday afternoon. Our Kevin Stone is going to be there. Belmont Hill at BB&N. Of course, BB&N, you got Damon Taylor, Bo McCormick. They can run the football as well as any team in New England. They can throw the football. They can make big plays. But they're taking on a Belmont Hill team that's looking to defend their ISL title from last year. Both of these teams are well positioned to make NEPSAC bowl games. But look, the goal here is to win the ISL. This game is going to go a long way in determining who wins the ISL come November.
Yes, I will. And I mean, I feel like a broken record when we come to these BB&N games, but I can't go against Bo McCormick. I think he's going to get the job done. They can really lean on him in that running game. And then I think you mentioned Damon Taylor. I think that's kind of the underrated thing about BB&N is they also can exploit you via the passing game as well once they get McCormick going.
Yeah, they're tough to beat when they get him going. And I mean, the Syracuse commit, he is just fantastic. Unheralded in many ways. I mean, this is a kid who, if he's playing at Westford Academy, probably gets a little bit more pub, but he has been tremendous the last 3 years, especially in that BB&N program. Next up, we have St. Sebastian's visiting Tabor in another big ISL large matchup. Tabor's been rolling along, arguably the most talented team in the ISL large, and take on a St. Sebastian's team that's big, that's physical, and that's capable of slowing the game down and making you play it at their pace. Tabor puts a lot of pressure on teams because of the Bork to drink water connection. They can run the ball with Hugo. They've got a big offensive line. They can match St. Sebastian's physicality. Our Sam Chozik's going to be there for this one. It is going to be a terrific early season ISL large matchup.
It is, and I'm happy. I'm happy it's coming. I'm happy it's this week because Tabor, they've kind of been dominating teams to this point. They're playing really good defense. I think that's going to continue. They're a very good team. But this is by far their biggest challenge to this point. Sebs is definitely the more battle-tested team to this point. But I think ultimately Tabor just has too many guys, too many horses. I think it's going to be a competitive game, but I lean Tabor in this one.
Yeah, I just think their skill group is so good. And if there's one team in the ISL large that can match St. Sebastian size-wise, it's Tabor. We're going to stick with Massachusetts for one more game here. Per request, we're going to add Carver at Cohasset. Patrick Keneally checking in. He wants a breakdown of Carver at Cohasset, so let's give it to him. This is going to be a pretty good matchup. I think a lot of people thought Carver was going to fall back a little bit because of all the seniors they graduated, the coaching change. That hasn't been the case. Crusaders have been pretty good. Cohasset's in the mix every single year. Peter Afanasu, one of the best coaches in the state, does a great job there. They always have good quarterback play. This is a good quarterback matchup here. This should be a really good game and a big game when you think long-term seeding ramifications when we get to playoff time.
Not even just seeding ramifications. Like Cohasset's played a pretty brutal schedule here. A lot of higher division teams. They're 2-3 right now with Carver, Mashpee, and Randolph left. So there's like an outside chance that Cohasset doesn't even get in. Like they go 2-6 and don't even get in, which would just be wild because I think they're clearly one of the 16 best teams in D7. Yeah, you mentioned the quarterback matchup here: Jack Balzerini, Michael Wildfire. Balzerini, first-year starter at quarterback after they graduated Tyler Lennox, and they've really shown no decline offensively to this point. I think if we were doing like right now, if we were like taking a poll on like who's the leader, who's the favorite for a Division 8 Player of the Year, I would say it probably is Jack Balzerini. He's making plays. I think Carver gets it done. Like Cohasset's played a lot of close games, but they haven't. They only pull out one against Nauset, but they've lost 3 other ones. So I think this is gonna be a close game as well. I lean Carver. Again, this is like truly a toss-up, but I lean Carver something like 26-20, 26-21. I think it's gonna be another one possession game for Cohasset.
Yeah, I think it'll be another close game. But like you mentioned, Balzerini, Wildfire. I love the quarterback matchup in this game. It's gonna make it fun. It could also lead to this being a high-scoring game because these two guys can do so much with the ball in their hands, whether it be as runners or passers, especially Wildfire. All right, next up, we're going to go down to Connecticut. Big matchup of the weekend in the CIAC is Hill House at Hand. Both teams come into the game undefeated at 4-0. Hand has been averaging over 34 points a game. Top 5 team in Connecticut. They have been impressive all year. Hill House kind of flown under the radar, but this is a program that has the talent that they can match up with Hand and make this a competitive game. They're coming off a win over Lyman Hall last week. Daniel Hand, to me, though, is an impressive program. I mean, what they did to FP a couple weeks ago, I don't think a lot of people saw. I mean, and that's a pretty good Fairfield prep team. But this Hand program, consistently, year in and year out, they know how to win. And I think that ultimately that proves to be the difference here. This is a tough game for me because I think a lot of people look at that Bunnell-Massac matchup the same way last week, and all of a sudden Bunnell beats Massac 21-0 after Massac shut out New Canaan the week before. But it's hard to pick against Hand here. I just think that they're just too talented, too experienced.
I agree. I think they've definitely played the harder of the two schedules too, so I think they're more battle tested at this point. I honestly think there's like a chance like Hand's in the top team in Connecticut discussion. Like I'd probably put Greenwich ahead of them, but I think Hand is right in that mix, top 2 or 3 team.
They're definitely top 5. I mean, you got Greenwich at 1. In our poll, we have Greenwich at 1. And then we have Staples in our top 5. And then we have Hand in our top 5 as well. So
yeah. So I think clearly a top 5 team in Connecticut at worst. So I think they're just too good at this point for Hill House. I got Hand.
Yeah, me too. All right, we're going to go up to Maine. The big matchup up in Maine this weekend is South Portland at Thornton Academy. Both of these teams coming in at 4-1. Thornton's only loss, of course, was to Bedford, New Hampshire, who has a big game themselves this weekend. South Portland's only loss was to Bonnie Eagle, who's been up and down. This should be a pretty good matchup, but those Saturday afternoon specials at Thornton Academy are tough. This is a tough matchup for South Portland. Thornton is still the standard, in my opinion, in Class A in Maine. Nonetheless, it should still be a pretty competitive game.
They are still the standard. I agree with that. That Thornton is still the standard. That Bedford team is very good that they lost to. South Portland, I think this is a nice kind of story here. I didn't really expect them. I think they're kind of flying under the radar here. They're one of the better teams in Maine. But again, we talk about it all the time in these big games. I just talked about it with a team like West Boylston. Until I see a team like Thornton Academy get knocked off, I'm not going to pick against them. I think they're the best team in Maine. I've got the Trojans.
All right, next up, we're going to go to the Granite State for what is arguably the game of the year in New Hampshire. It'll certainly be one of the top games of the year in New Hampshire. Pinkerton, who lost to Salem, which kind of takes a little bit of the shine off this one, travels to Bedford. And to me, when you look at this Bedford team, man, and you talk about underrated programs in New England, they're right there. They're at the top of the list, if not at the top of the list. Certainly, when you think about what are the 5 most underrated programs in the region, they're on that list because this is a program, Tyler, that has been dominant the last 3 years. They don't get a lot of attention because they play in New Hampshire, but Zach Matthews has done a great job there. They play really good defense. And this year, they can make some big plays on offense. Jack May at quarterback, that passing game is really good. Pinkerton, Brian O'Reilly, he's a legend in New Hampshire. One of the top wing T offenses in the region, year in and year out. They're really well coached. Surprise loss to Salem. I know some people said don't be that surprised. Salem is a good squad. But again, even though that takes some of the shine off this matchup, I still think it's a great matchup between 2 of the power programs in New Hampshire right now.
It is. And so I definitely thought Pinkerton was going to win that game last week, but I think I mentioned on the show, like that was like the classic look ahead spot. Like you've got Bedford coming up and this Salem team is 100% good enough to catch you in a situation like that. And I think that's kind of what happened there. But with that said, I still think truly that Pinkerton is a better team than Salem. And I think Pinkerton is probably the second best team in New Hampshire after Bedford. But you mentioned that Bulldog defense. I think they get after it again here today or this week, and I think Bedford wins.
Yeah, they'll have their hands full. I mean, Pinkerton, like I said, that wing T is tough to defend. I mean, they run it so well, and Coach O'Reilly does such a good job of getting the ball to multiple guys in that running game. But this Bedford team is nasty right now. They're playing at a high level. They're going for a three-peat. And really, you look at that Londonderry game a couple weeks ago. I mean, they're just a notch above, and I think that is the difference here right now. I mean, the fact that they were able to go up to Thornton and beat that team, and they beat them by 2 scores. I mean, it just shows you how good this program is right now. And certainly if they win this week, they'll be in the driver's seat to get that D1 three-peat. All right, next up, we're going to go down to the Ocean State, Rhode Island. One of the top matchups this weekend in Rhode Island is South Kingston at Cranston West. Our Charlie Adams will be at that one. The Rebels have kind of been flying under the radar in D2 in Rhode Island, but they've been impressive thus far. They picked up a 10-7 win over West Warwick last week. Cranston West got off to a good start. They've slowed down here recently, but Coach Maluski's Falcons, they're a pretty good football team. They're well coached. Always tough to play at Cranston Stadium. This should be a pretty good matchup between 2 teams that are going to be in the mix come playoff time.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be another competitive game here. South Kingston, they kind of they played some pretty good defense throughout the year. You mentioned Cranston West and their recent losses, but those were to 2 of arguably the top 5 teams in Rhode Island, to St. Ray's and Cumberland. So I think this is gonna be a good game. Again, I kind of in these tight games, I kind of lean on lean toward the team that's more battle tested. At this point, I think it's Cranston West, so I've got them winning this.
Yeah, I'm going to go with South Kingston. I think, like I said, the Rebels here they've been flying under the radar, but this is a top 10 program in Rhode Island, and they've been pretty good in recent years. I mean, again, because you've had the Barringtons and the Cumberlands and a lot of those teams that they would be lumped in with, I think a lot of people forget how much this program has improved through the years and how good they've been in recent years. I think they go into Cranston Stadium and get it done. I think it'll be a really tight game. They play tight games typically. I think they pull this one off. And finally, we go up to Vermont. We got Essex at Middlebury. Middlebury is coming off a loss to CVU. Essex had a 4-overtime thriller win over Rutland. Should be a pretty good matchup between 2 teams that are a notch below CVU in Division I in Vermont, but 2 teams that could be in the mix. And we saw this 2 years ago with Middlebury. They ended up winning a state title, pulling off the upset. They are certainly good enough to do it. They're going to need to take care of business this weekend, though, if they want to position themselves to potentially do it again in this year's playoffs.
Yeah. This is I think Tewksbury, Billerica, and then this game, I think those are probably 2 of the harder ones to pick this week. I'm going to lean Middlebury. I don't feel fully confident with that pick, but I'll say 21-14 Middlebury. I think they pull it off.
Middlebury to me is just one of those teams that, like I said, they could go on a run here, and I know it's hard in Vermont because we've seen this with Burton. They've had their dominant stretches. Now it's CVU. Middlebury had their run a couple of years ago, but I think this is a program that's battle tested. They're experienced, and come playoff time, this is a program they can get through. And in Division I in Vermont is very competitive. I mean, you usually have 4 or 5 teams that are in the mix. All right, well, that'll do it for this week's episode of the High School Preview Show. Tyler, I want to say thank you for taking the time, my friend. Greatly appreciate it. Of course, you're going to be at Bishop Hendrick and Barnstable this week, and you're going to be at Scituate Hanover, so we're looking forward to your coverage there. And as always, I mean, your knowledge of high school football in New England is second to none, my friend. I mean, it is impressive, and we're fortunate to have you, and thanks again for taking the time.
Yeah, for sure. I'm looking forward to it. Should be a great weekend of football. Just one last game. I believe Salem, New Hampshire is going to Cumberland this week. I believe that's happening. So what are your thoughts on that one?
I love it. I mean, Cumberland has played Reading. I mean, Cumberland, Coach Lima's not afraid to play people. I love this matchup. I think it's fascinating. I think it's going to be a terrific matchup. So
I do too. I struggle to pick a winner in that one too. I think maybe Salem's kind of coming off that high, and Cumberland's coming off a tough loss to Reading. Cumberland's going back home. I think I would lean Cumberland in that one, but it should be a fun one. I really love these interstate matchups.
They are fantastic. And, for us, honestly, we want to cover them as many of them as possible. And it's not easy. I mean, we only have so many boots on the ground, but it is these interstate matchups. I mean, they're fantastic. And of course, these two teams are playing Friday night at 7 p.m. So it should be fantastic. All right. Well, that'll do it for this week's show. Again, for Tyler Ammer, I'm John Serenitas. We'll be back with you next week to preview some of the top matchups in Massachusetts and throughout New England. Until then,